Pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. And talking about the terrorists who committed the atrocity behind me in this theatre, in which young people just having a night out with their friends, their girlfriends, their boyfriends, were massacred whilst just there listening to a band they love. And the reason I say pathetic, sounds a bit of an odd thing to say, but actually it's a very important point, because these terrorists who committed the atrocities behind this, they depend above all else on their reputation. They want to be seen as fighters, as warriors. I'm afraid to say that reputation is built up by their friends and their enemies alike. It's in their interests for us to see them as these, at war with these people, this ragtag bunch of thugs. And I think the reason that's so important is because, firstly, that reputation allows them to get recruits. And secondly, people often in Syria and Iraq won't fight them. They'll flee rather than fight because of that reputation. So it's in our interest to just smash that reputation into little pieces. They're pathetic what they did. Humans have huge potential. Huge potential. And that potential can be one of selflessness, altruism, generosity, looking out for each other. But the flip side of that is a potential for limitless cruelty and barbarism. That's what we saw there last Friday. But there were just a bunch of people with guns who marched into a place where people were defenceless and shot them.
I am agreeing with you.
Oh, well, good. That's good to hear. What's your name?
My name is Leila.
Leila. How do you feel
They are not Muslims, My daughter asked me, Mom, they are Muslims. I said no. Muslims do not do this act. I'm afraid. Je pense à ma famille. Je pense pas à moi-même, mais à mes amis, à ma famille. Et croyez-moi que c'est pas des musulmans.
How can we defeat them? How will we defeat these extremists? How do you think we'll do that?
C'est des jeunes qui ont voulu venir ici pour se distraire. C'est leur choix, c'est leur vie, c'est leur pays. Comment qu'on peut interdire quelqu'un pour sortir le soir et se distraire? Franchement, c'est un acte barbare.
We can see that pretty moving chat with her. She's a woman from Algeria, a Muslim French woman who's here like anybody else, full of grief and anguish at this disgusting, despicable atrocity. But she's scared. She's scared, and she feels people like her are suddenly going to be blamed for an act, and an atrocity that she's discussed as anybody else's. You can see the sign up there. It says "La liberté est un monument indestructible," and that means liberty is an indestructible monument. And I think that kind of sums up partly the mood around here, and that is of defiance. I think there's a sense of stick up your two fingers to these people. And you can see people over there gathering, and there's all these flowers and candles and stuff, and they're just reflecting, I think, on what happened. The emotional aftermath of this is difficult to have a rational conversation. And we've got to have it, because we don't want this to happen again. And if it does keep happening, people could be dying for a generation or more in these sorts of atrocities. So we've got to have a rational conversation. Now, they have a script, these people, ISIS, they have a script. They are trying to provoke a schism, a fatal schism between Western societies and Muslim populations. It is a level of stupidity and blindness and bigotry that I'm afraid is beyond my own comprehension, for people to basically follow out that script. The people now turning on Muslims and scapegoating Muslims en masse are literally doing exactly what ISIS want them to do. And they don't even realise it. Firstly, the vast majority of Muslims are repulsed by what ISIS stand for and what they do. And the second point, this is a really crucial point, the vast majority in Syria and Iraq being killed by ISIS are Muslim. We can't forget that. They're an anti-Muslim terrorist organisation above all else in terms of those they target. We've had experts who've been following the Twitter feeds of ISIS extremists, and do you know what angered them and upset them most in the last few months in terms of what they've been watching on television? It was the response of the West to refugees in terms of people welcoming them. That's the last thing they want. That's the last thing I want to see, Muslim refugees being welcomed here in Europe. Now, everyone's talking about what happens next, because the starting point of all of this is to defeat these people and their ideology and to stop these atrocities happening again. The unavoidable gut reaction anyone has when they see these atrocities is take out the people responsible, drop those bombs. We've had the war on terror now for 14 years, the so-called war on terror, ever since the atrocities on September the 11th in New York, Washington and Pennsylvania, which Al-Qaeda, of course, were responsible for. Now, in those 14 years of the so-called war on terror, can anyone say afterwards that it's been a success? We've seen the wars in Iraq, in which hundreds of thousands died, were maimed, millions driven from their homes. It became Al-Qaeda's playground, and of course, alongside all the sectarian bloodbath and carnage, we saw the rise of ISIS, of course, in post-invasion Iraq. We've seen what happened in Libya as well. You know, a country now which is a de facto failed state, overrun by many Islamic fundamentalist militia, including, of course, ISIS, who have committed atrocities there as well. Unless there is a political solution in Syria with a government that can attract the support, the confidence of the majority of the population, then there's no way of solving this problem. And I do not think for a second that lots more bombs are going to help that. You know what, if we're going to talk about the causes of extremism, you can't reduce it to one thing or the other. You know, the head of the Tunisian Conservative Party visited the European Parliament, and he spoke to right-wing parties, and he said socio-economic problems what often drove people to extremism. If you've got so many young people without a future, including young graduates without a future, as the journalist Paul Mason often describes them, those people are often susceptible to being drawn to extremism. So we have to talk about that. One of the problems is we're not tackling some of the root causes. I think of dictatorships supported and propped up by Western governments, like the Saudi dictatorship, which exports extremist ideology, not just across the Middle East, but across the wider world as well. And when we talk about foreign policy, you know, there's always this idea, you bring that up, and it's, everyone, you know, you just want to use this as an opportunity, blame the West, it's the West's fault. And of course you can't reduce it to that, but there's no question, which senior MI5 people and all the rest have made the point, that foreign policy has had a role in radicalisation. Those reasons all have to be explored, and we have to be open-minded about them. And any attempt to shut down that debate by saying, oh, you're an apologist for extremism, will mean we won't tackle it. And understanding is not justifying. You know, if I say the rise of the Nazis had so much to do with the Great Depression of the 1930s or the Treaty of Versailles, am I justifying the Nazis? No, I'm not. I'm understanding their rise. We've got to do the same with ISIS, without just saying, well, it's just an evil ideology and leaving it at that. There's no easy solutions to any of this. Anyone who tells you that is either, you know, ignorant or a liar. There isn't. You know, this is an intractable, complex situation. There will be those who believe that if we just bomb Syria and Iraq enough, then we can just defeat ISIS. I don't think that's going to happen. Even if you support military action, there has to be a political solution. And we have to think long and hard about all the reasons people become radicalised. And only by doing that can we stop it happening over and over again. You know, we've got to build a world where everyone can live in peace together, where we don't have innocent people being murdered as they get on with their lives. That's got to be the starting point. So it's going to be difficult, and if another of these atrocities happens again in another Western city, then that conversation will get harder still. And that, I'm afraid, is exactly what ISIS want to happen.